The murder shocked the nation and catapulted the killers into the media spotlight.
So you're Herb Clutter, 48 years old. To some people, you're an ultra-rich farmer with a lot of wealth, gold, and valuables hidden in your house. They see you and think, wow, this is what success is all about. To many, you're a combination of strength and success. They look at you and see everything they aspire to be. But not everyone feels this way. For some, they see you as a way to get rich quick. They see you with your large farmland and think, if we could just rob this guy, we will be set for life. Well, this is what Richard Dick Hickok and Perry Smith thought. This is the story of how two robbers ended an entire family and made true crime an American obsession. In 1959, the brutal murders of 4 members of the Clutter family in a small farming community of Holcomb, Kansas, shocked the nation when the story hit the news. Murder of this magnitude just didn't happen to farm families in the heartland of America. Herb Clutter was one of the most respected men in Finney County, Kansas. He was a college graduate, successful wheat farmer, and community leader who could always be counted on to lend a hand. His wife, Bonnie, 45 years old, had clinical depression and rarely left the house. However, her struggles did not stop her from doting on her 2 children, who remained at home, Nancy, 16, and a son, Kenyon, 15, who were high school students. 2 older daughters, Eviana and Beverly, had married and moved away, starting their own families. Having traveled the length of Kansas to steal the contents of Clutter's safe, and Dick and Perry were not leaving empty-handed. As the criminal pair entered the Clutter home, Hickok carried a knife and Smith a shotgun. Guided only by a flashlight, they searched for the safe in the quiet house. However, the search yielded nothing. As they continued through the house, they were less than careful about the noise they might be making. Herb Clutter, asleep in his bed, was awakened by a flashlight shining in his eyes. Clutter was taken by gunpoint into his office, where he repeatedly told the intruders that he had no safe and transacted all of his business by check. He offered to write them a check and give them the contents of his wallet if they would leave his family in peace. After spending 2 hours in the house, the family awakens. Herb Clutter and his son Kenyon were taken to the basement, separated and hog-tied. In her second-floor bedroom, Nancy Clutter was tied to her bedpost, and Mrs. Clutter was removed from her bedroom and placed in the upstairs bathroom, where she was tied. Their mouths were also taped shut. Smith then stayed in the basement while Hickok returned upstairs to resume the search for the safe. A short time later, Hickok returned to the basement, disappointed and angry, having not found the safe. One by one, the killing began. Perry Smith goaded Dick Hickok to use the knife on Herb Clutter, who seemed incapable of doing so. Perry then grabbed the knife from Dick and set the violence in motion, while Dick did nothing to stop him. Kneeling on the floor, Perry sliced the throat of Herb Clutter and challenged Dick to finish him off, but he was unable or unwilling. Perry then shot Clutter at close range as Dick trained the flashlight on him. Moments after Herb was killed, Smith shot Kenyon to death. The ex-convicts then headed upstairs, entering Nancy's room, and she was shot to death. Lastly, Bonnie Clutter was killed by a gunshot wound to the side of the head. The spent shotgun shells were retrieved by the killers before Hickok and Smith fled the crime scene, taking with them a Zenith portable radio, a pair of binoculars belonging to Herb Clutter, and less than $50 in cash. When officers arrived, Herb Clutter, 48, lay sprawled on a mattress in the basement, stabbed, his throat slashed, and a shotgun charge fired to his head. He wore pajamas, his hands were bound, and his mouth was taped shut. On a couch in an adjoining room was 15-year-old Kenyon Neil Clutter, bound, gagged, and shot in the head. In separate upstairs bedrooms were the bodies of Mrs. Bonnie Mae Clutter, 45, and Nancy Mae Clutter, 16. Mrs. Clutter was bound and gagged. Nancy was only bound. Each had been shot in the head. Garden City Police Department Chief Mitchell Geisler was among the first officers to arrive at the horrific scene. Accompanying him was Assistant Chief Rich Rohleder. Rohleder was an expert photographer and used his skills to photograph the crime scene. Although the technology wasn't nearly to the level it is today, it was through row leaders' photographs that the discovery of a bloody footprint remained from Smith. A photograph was also taken of a tire track left in haste by the murderers. Approximately 1,000 mourners attended the Clutter family funeral, packing the First Methodist Church in Garden City, Kansas. Most of that crowd was also present at the burial at Valley View Cemetery on the north edge of Garden City. Alvin Dewey of the Kansas Bureau of Investigations, KBI, led the investigation with help from 4 other KBI investigators working under him. He also solicited the support of other governmental agencies to develop evidence and leads. During the time Hickok and Smith spent canvassing the country, Dewey and the KBI could piece together evidence corroborated by a fellow prisoner, Floyd Wells, who had ratted out the murderers for ransom money being offered at the time. Floyd Wells later killed himself in a prison break in Mississippi. Immediately following the murders, Hickok and Smith fled to Kansas City, where Hickok wrote a series of hot checks. After overstaying their welcome, they decided to flee to Mexico, where they lived for a short period. There, they pawned the binoculars and eventually hitchhiked their way through California en route to Omaha, Nebraska. After a short stay in Omaha, they went to Iowa, where they stole a car and returned to the Kansas City area. From Kansas City, they eventually traveled to Florida and Nevada. Hickok and Smith were captured in Las Vegas, Nevada on December 30th, 6 weeks after the murders. They were still driving a stolen car they had acquired in Iowa. They also had in their possession the boot that made the bloody print. After being extradited to Kansas, the prisoners were retained at the old-fashioned but fail-safe Finney County Jail in Garden City. They were kept separated by wings. Hickok occupied his time by reading, while Smith had little company, as his family seemed to have disowned him. Hickok's family visited him often. Their trial was held at the Finney County Courthouse in Garden City. Public turnout was significant. Over the next 3 days, witnesses were called for the prosecution. On March 29, 1960, after deliberating for a mere 40 minutes, a jury of all men returned a verdict of guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, and they were sentenced to death. The pair were then sent to the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, Kansas, northwest of Kansas City. For the next 5 years, they lived on death row. On April 14, 1965, they were hanged at the Kansas State Penitentiary. Hickok was executed first and was pronounced dead at 12:41 a.m. Smith followed shortly afterward and was pronounced dead at 1:19 a.m. Smith's last words were, "I think it is a hell of a thing that a life has to be taken in this manner. I say this especially because there's a great deal I could have offered society. I certainly think capital punishment is legally and morally wrong. Any apology for what I have done would be meaningless at this time. I don't have any animosities toward anyone involved in this matter. I think that is all." Hickok's last words were, "No, I guess I don't." However, he then mentioned to KBI agent Roy Church, who played a significant role in the arrest of the 2 men, to come to him and said, "You're sending me to a better place than this." He then shook hands and said, "Goodbye."